from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Good morning, everybody. Grim news from Birmingham. Big car smash. 6 people died in a multi-vehicle crash. We'll bring you news of that as it develops during the course of the next hour or two. And today is a day when the Sunday newspapers and programmes analyse the last fortnight, Mrs May's fortnight, from tragedy to triumph is what many of them are telling us, because we have moved on. We will be moving on to the second phase of our, not just withdrawal, but we're going to start talking about trade. Mrs May herself writing in the Telegraph, writing in the Sunday Express also, reassuring all of us that everything's going to be great. Not everybody is convinced by that, least of all me, because I think actually we're not now leaving on the 29th of March 2019. Even the date itself may slip, but effectively, and the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, couldn't have been clearer yesterday, that we go into a 2-year period in which absolutely nothing changes at all. And Jacob Rees-Mogg has said we mustn't allow ourselves to be a colony. Boris even hints we shouldn't be a vassal state. But what I've noticed with all of this is that every time the Prime Minister makes another concession, the Leavers back off a little bit and say, don't worry, folks, it'll be OK next time round. There was also, of course, been a lot of focus on 11 Conservative MPs who voted against their own government, defeating the government. As you know, this happened on Thursday. It was quite a dramatic thing for the government to lose their first big loss. The cheering in the chamber was quite extraordinary, some of the loudest that I've ever heard. So there have been some pretty vicious attacks on these Tory MPs. And yet, if you really think about it, you know, Ken Clarke has held this point of view for over 50 years, so no particular surprise there. There may be others who perhaps weren't as frank with their electorates back in June as they might have been. But to me, the story that everybody's been missing here completely is the real reason that the government lost. The real reason that Parliament will now have a veto if there is a deal at the end of the process is that actually it's the Labour Party that has been through the big transformation. Now look, during the election, Corbyn played it remarkably. He appealed to Leave voters in the Midlands and the North and South Wales by saying in the manifesto, absolutely, very, very clearly, that Labour supported leaving the EU, leaving the single market and ending freedom of movement. What could be clearer? And yet, sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink in London and the South and elsewhere, really, don't worry, you know, Labour are the ones that will fight to keep European values and perhaps even some form of membership of the single market. So he's got away with it for a very, very long time. And it appears today that he's still getting away with it. He himself, of course, an old Bennite, voted against every single European treaty presented to him in the House of Commons since 1983. But given that vote, given our old friend Tony Blair, now out there this weekend saying that Labour should prioritise stopping Brexit ahead of winning the next election, the question I want to ask you this morning is, has Labour now become a Remain party? And my view is that whatever Corbyn himself and indeed McDonnell may have thought over many long years, and even though there are 4 to 5 million Labour voters who voted Brexit in the referendum, I think that Corbyn is a complete hostage on this issue, complete hostage to his own parliamentary party, because that party in the House of Commons is overwhelmingly Blairite and pro-EU, and I think they have moved quite strongly now to a Remain position. They will oppose the government all the way through this process. They will, of course, have the support of some of those Tory rebels, but I think that Labour, frankly, have been pretty dishonest with the electorate to fight an election just 5 months ago saying they were for leaving, and now Keir Starmer keeps telling us that perhaps we should consider staying in the single market and the customs union in perpetuity. So please tell me, do you agree with me that Labour are now a Remain party? If so, call me on 0345 6060 973. Or perhaps you think, no, they'll keep playing all ends against the middle. It's just a tactical game they're playing. Text me on 84850. Or perhaps you think, actually, this was their agenda all along. They just conned the electorate back in June, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. You can watch me on Facebook and comment there too. Has Labour become a Remain party? Simon, who's a new caller to the show from Tyneside, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. I think personally that it's all kind of like about the long game. So what we've got is we've got Jeremy Corbyn waiting until the absolute point where we realise that, or most people realise what I already know and lots of people know, that Brexit is an absolute disaster for the country.
Oh, right.
And then you'll come out and save the day.
Right, well, but, I mean, we're not rerunning the referendum, Simon. The fact is...
That's not what I'm saying. No, that's not what I'm saying. But are you...
So are you happy, Simon? Are you happy, then? I mean, I presume that you're a Labour supporter, yeah?
Yeah, card-carrying member.
OK, so are you comfortable, Simon, that the party that you pay your subs to and you carry the card for, are you comfortable that just a few months ago in the election they told the electorate they were for leaving the single market and ending the free movement of people, and now they're taking a different position?
Nigel, have you ever changed your mind about anything?
Well, of course, but it's pretty rich, isn't it?
That's really the question, isn't it?
So
your mind about anything significant?
Right. So you think the Labour Party changed the day after the general election, or did it take them a week?
No. I think that what the Labour Party do, which is what the Conservative government aren't doing, and yourself are not doing, is taking some time to take stock of what's going to happen and actually putting the national interest above really small-minded, petty principles that you've held for a very, very long time. You know what I mean? And I think it's about time that somebody stood up.
Do you mean petty principles like governing your own country through a democratic process?
Could you give us an example of where we haven't governed our own country?
Oh, we haven't made most of our legislation now for decades.
That's not what I asked for an example.
I mean, literally.
Honestly, just go on.
Employment legislation, fisheries, farming. I could go through every single sector, every single economic sector, Simon, or financial services, where we effectively are not legislating and where well over 80% of the laws that affect those businesses are made somewhere else. Now, if you go back, Simon... If you go back to the elections of the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, the great choice was that the Labour and Conservative offerings in the manifestos were very, very different, and how you voted fundamentally changed employment laws, etc. That doesn't happen anymore. So Simon, look, I don't want to rerun the referendum with you, but you're confident then that Labour now will be a Remain party, yeah?
Over our laws. One specific example.
Oh, look, every single piece of financial service, every single piece. You know, you're living on the coast up there, aren't you?
No, not at all. Actually, I'm inland, living in quite an urban area.
All right, well, go to your nearest port at lunchtime, meet a fisherman, ask him what his quotas are for this month, and then ask who set them, all right? But you're trying to have a different debate. I'm asking you, were Labour honest with the electorate in June?
In our relationship with Europe, and that's the best you can come up with. Go and meet a fisherman. Really?
Go and meet. I tell you what. Go into Newcastle tomorrow. Go and see a firm of insurance brokers. Go and meet any commercial industry based in Newcastle or anywhere else up there, and find out where every single rule they have to abide by comes from, and you'll find it comes from somewhere else. Simon, I'm not going to rerun the referendum with you.
Nigel, can I just say one last thing before you hang up on us, which you have done twice previously?
Well, not surprising given the way this conversation's going, is it?
Well, no, this is a debate conversation. You know,
I'm asking you: have Labour become a Remain party?
Then I would say Labour are becoming a Remain party.
Okay, fine.
Realise the utter disaster that Brexit is going to be.
Fine, no, Simon, that's fine. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on. Thank you. Labour is becoming a Remain party, Simon says, and he's proud of that. And he thinks they're perfectly entitled to have changed their mind since the general election in June. And I think if Simon is right, that they are becoming a Remain party, it is an act of extraordinary dishonesty. That's my view. What does Mark in Sevenoaks think? Good morning.
Hi. First of all, I think we need to point out that the vast majority of Labour people, Labour MPs, did support Remain in the in the referendum, over 90%, I think.
Yep.
And the problem now with the polls is that, according to my calculation, there are about 340 Remain constituencies with Remain MPs in them. I think that the Labour Party said that they were going to support support Brexit because they considered it to be the will of the people, rather than because the MPs had changed their minds. I mean, even Theresa May didn't say she'd changed her mind on the situation when interviewed. And
No, that's true.
the polls are now indicating that the people who didn't vote in the referendum because they were too young, perhaps, or the people who didn't vote because they just didn't know what would happen, seem to be making up their minds that they're worried about Brexit, and that is the way things are going. I think I think we need to be clearer about Brexit in one respect. I think that independence is the wrong word to use, because we want to be interdependent with people to trade with them. I think flexibility is the thing that we need from the EU.
Well, we haven't seen much of it, Mark, have we?
No.
In the negotiations, I mean, the only side that's had to show flexibility has been us again and again and again.
I think that there's a problem in principle with the way in which the EU think, in the sense that in everything you need to balance standardization, gives you convenience, with flexibility, which allows you to experiment and improve.
Mark, these are all arguments about, mutual recognition of standards and how much freedom and competition we can have outside the single market, or whether we, as the Chancellor says, should stay aligned. But my basic premise, Mark, is that I think the Labour Party, frankly, were dishonest with the electorate. They did it to get Leavers to vote for them, and they're now becoming a Remain party. Would you agree with that?
On that strict point, the problem with... I would agree with everything that you said, apart from the point you made about honesty. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think that any of the Labour MPs said that they had changed their mind. No.
Mark, you're right.
The majority of people wanted it.
Mark, overwhelmingly,
that
Mark.
may not be the case.
Mark, overwhelmingly, it's a Blairite parliamentary party. You're absolutely right. 90% of them did back Remain. It's just that they stood on a manifesto that was somewhat different. That's all I'm saying. Mark, I thank you for your points and your call. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:15. I don't think we're talking about Labour enough. They got millions of people to vote for them back in June, saying they wanted to leave the single market, take back control of our borders, and they're now playing a very different game. Not just to helping to defeat the government on Thursday, but Keir Starmer, their main spokesman on the EU issue, suggesting that maybe membership of the single market and customs union is something we should do in perpetuity. And I just think they've been very dishonest with the electorate. I think Labour are becoming a Remain party. That's my feeling. I wonder what Sylvia in Putney thinks.
Hello, Nigel. It's lovely to speak to you.
Good morning.
Morning. I think we're witnessing, sorry, I've got a funny throat. I think we're witnessing the same modus operandi that was going on pre-1997 election. Do you remember at that time, Tory MPs were being shamed in the press on a daily basis, sexual peccadillos, etc., etc.
This was the John Major's back to basics, wasn't it? It rather backfired, didn't it?
David Mellor went through it, and various others, and it went on daily for months and months, never let up. When one subject was going out of the press, another one came in, and we've been witnessing this over the last 6 months. And this is I call them the Moriarty gang, which is led by... We need Sherlock Holmes to get to the back of it to see what they're actually doing. And this is Tony Blair, Alistair Campbell, Mandelson, the woman whose name I've forgotten, Miller.
Gina Miller, yeah.
Gina Miller, and those people. And that's the Moriarty gang. And they're doing it behind the scenes. And first you bring down the Tory government, and then you move in. And this is what's been going on for the last 6 months. And on top of that, the Remainers have become too confident. They've seen what is what we've witnessed as a demise of UKIP. Now, I'm one of those people. I have to vote Tory to keep the Labour out, and I want to vote UKIP. And this is what's been going on. So I suggest to all those who want to come out of Europe now, get to UKIP en masse. Let those 17.4 million of us.
The difficulty is, Sylvia, that there are millions of people like you out there. I know from my years of leading UKIP and standing for UKIP that people would say, well, Nigel, we absolutely agree with you, but in this constituency, we've got to vote Labour, otherwise the Tories will get in. And then you go 100 miles south and they say, Nigel, we absolutely agree with you, but we've got to vote Tory to stop Labour getting in. And it's very, very difficult. I mean, for UKIP to have got... I look back on it now and think, for UKIP to have got 4 million votes in a general election, 4.5 million votes in a European election, given the nature of our first past the post system, was of itself quite an achievement. But Sylvia, in reality, are millions really going to say, right, this time we won't worry about a Corbyn government or a May government, we'll vote for the party that supports our view? Are they really going to do it?
If we did it en masse, this would frighten the life out.
Oh, it would, if. But that's my question, Sylvia. Would people do it?
I don't know. You see, I can't take the risk that they will. I want to do this.
Well...
And all those Labour people, they're now voting Labour, and people are even voting Liberal Democrats. Would you believe in these by-elections?
Sylvia, you are a Leave, clearly a very passionate Leave supporter. But let me just suppose there was a general election next week, all right? And you've got Mrs May with her very soft form of Brexit, or Jeremy Corbyn as the runners and riders to be the next Prime Minister, and UKIP and the Lib Dems. Who would you vote for next week?
Well, you see, this is my dilemma.
Well, listen, you don't have to answer that. The fact you've got that dilemma shows you just how difficult it is to change British politics. It's a great call. I thank you. Now, joining me now is John Mills. He's one of Labour's... no, right, I apologise. He's not with us yet. David is my next caller from Norwich. David, good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good, I'm fine, thank you. And you?
Fine and wonderful. I would just like to say that Labour have always been Remainers. The bulk of as have the majority of the politicians, the political elite. They do not listen to what the bulk of the British people want. Now, that last lady just mentioned UKIP. Had it not been for us, there wouldn't have been a referendum, and the bulk of the British people went for us. And what happened after that, Nigel, you know this as well as I do, that the political elite got together, they were flabbergasted. They didn't think any way, shape or form they were going to lose. And what did they do the week after? They had a meeting and said, hang on, look guys, the British people listen to UKIP, we don't want that, we want to do what we want to do, we've got to get rid of them. And that's what they've managed to try to do over the past 18 months. And people are really, really angry. I mean angry.
I mean, David, I'm going to take issue with you on one thing. You said the Labour Party have always been Remainers. Actually, history turns that the other way around completely, because in the 1970s, it was the Labour Party who were against joining the common market. And, really big guns in Labour, and one's thinking of the Michael Foots and the Tony Benns and people like this, were vehemently opposed to joining the common market. And indeed, David, as recently as the 1983 Labour manifesto, they were publicly in favour of withdrawal. But it was during Kinnock's time, when Jacques Delors turned up at the conference, TUC and Labour, that they changed. So, historically, they've not always been Remain. But the basic point you're making is, and I think it's a very good point, and it's kind of a point that Adam Bolton makes in today's Sunday Times, and it is that if UKIP is as weak as it currently is, the Remainers in both the big parties can soften Brexit, delay Brexit, without the fear of electoral consequences for their party. That's what's really going on, isn't it?
Well, exactly, yeah, but because the people have... Who can the people turn to represent them? They know the Conservative Party in the main wants to remain, the Labour Party, everybody, the politician, the political system wants to remain. But the everyday, man on the street, the normal British person, there's no one to stand there and represent them.
No, I know, and David, and yet, and I completely understand the argument, but the phone call I had on before you, don't know whether you heard it, Sylvia, she's a passionate Leaver, UKIP supporter, yet she votes Tory to stop the Labour getting in. I don't know what the answer is. David, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Labour are a Remain party, I get by text. Hopefully remain in opposition, says Peter in Lancing. Good work pouring sunlight on the Labour Brexit position. Nobody else seems to be doing that, says Dee from Dulwich. I'm a Labour Party member. I think you were right. They have become Remainers and sold us out, says Tamsin in Woolwich. Nigel, Labour are just being typically opportunistic, and like all the mainstream parties, they're split on Brexit, says Gary from Hillingdon. Well, the truth is that the Labour vote in the country might be split on Brexit, because of those that voted Labour in June of this year, I think it is somewhere between 4 and 5 million that voted Brexit in the referendum the year before. But the truth of it is that amongst the Labour MPs at this division that took place on Thursday in the House of Commons, only Frank Field and Kate Hoey supported the government position. So it looks like, even Dennis Skinner, and I was amazed by this, Dennis Skinner, who's been anti-EU for half a century, even Dennis Skinner, in the case of this vote, went with his party line against the government. So I think the truth of it is Labour may be split in the country amongst their voters on Brexit, but I think the Labour Party now is overwhelmingly a Remain party, and that's what we're seeing. And I just wonder whether they can go to the country again at a next election, kind of pretending somehow that they will support Brexit causes, given what's happened. Now, I have got on the line John Mills, one of Labour's biggest donors, the businessman behind the JML home shopping firm. But interestingly, I think John is the only person alive to have played a prominent role in both the referendums of 1975 and 2016. And John is running the Labour Leave campaign. John, good morning.
And to you.
Good morning. Now, John, I have to ask you, because I know that Labour Leave was very active during the referendum, and I know that in some ways you must have influenced that Labour manifesto in June, which made it clear it would honour what people voted for in the referendum. What on earth has happened to your party since the general election?
Well, I think the trouble is that the Parliamentary Labour Party has a very large majority of people who would go for the softest Brexit they could, or maybe even reverse the whole thing if they had an opportunity to do so. And with that large block of votes in the Labour Party in that position, plus the dissidents in the Conservative Party, let alone the Lib Dems and so on, I don't think there's a majority in the House of Commons now for a WTO deal, which needs to be the fallback if you're going to negotiate with the EU 27 with some reasonable chance of getting a reasonable deal. And I think the danger now is we're going to finish up with a very soft Brexit, which is going to finish up by being more or less the same as we were before we started, but with no control over which way the EU is going and still paying the money and all the rest of it.
Yeah, well, that's my big fear too. But, John, what happened? What happened to your MPs? I mean, I've already mentioned the fact that Kate Hoey and Frank Field supported the government position on this, but what happened to all those other Labour MPs who advocated voting leave? Where were they during this division this week?
Well, I think that is a bit of a good question, because there certainly were some who we would have thought would have voted with the government on this issue, and they just didn't do so. And the majority was only 4, so we only needed 2 or 3 to have gone, well, 4 really, to have gone into the lobby, 5 certainly. And the result would have been different. Unfortunately, that just didn't happen.
John, I mean, this next question is going to pain you, given the amount of years you've spent in the Labour Party and the personal money you've put into it. But isn't it time now for people like you to face the facts that Euroscepticism is now dead within this Labour Party?
Well, I don't think that is the case. I mean, I think it is true in the House of Commons, but if you look at the way people voted in the referendum, nearly 40% of Labour voters, the people who voted Labour in the 2015 general election, voted for Leave. So there's a very substantial body of people who are Labour voters who are in favour of Brexit. And there is this real problem, which is that the leaders of the Labour Party, or at least some of them, don't really reflect very accurately the views of a large number of Labour supporters.
I understand that, John, but effectively, haven't they been conned? Because, you know, the Labour manifesto couldn't have been clearer, and now the party's taking completely the opposite position.
Well, I think the danger is that what's going to happen is nominally we are going to come out of the European Union and out of the single market and out of the customs union, but in practice, because we'll have to comply with all the various regulations that pertain to both of them, actually nothing very much will change. And so we'll finish up nominally doing what we said we'd do in the referendum and in the general election manifesto, but in practice, this isn't what's going to happen, and that's my concern.
Yeah, no, John, and that's a concern I think that Leavers from all across the political spectrum share. John Mills, thank you very much indeed. Well, John Mills there, you know, who's put half a century of his life into the Labour Party and indeed into Eurosceptic causes, not been a particularly good week for him or Labour leavers, or indeed people who voted Labour who believe in leave. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:31. 6 people have died and a 7th is critically hurt after a multi-vehicle crash in Birmingham. 6 vehicles were involved. It happened early this morning on Birmingham's inner city ring road. Our LBC reporter in the Midlands, Alex Hulse, can update us. Hello? Right, we'll come back to Alex in a second. We're very good at losing lines this morning. On a lighter note than that horrendous crash, you may have seen that Georgia Toffolo, known as the Toff, has won I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and she is a big Tory supporter and Brexit supporter, and she said Jacob Rees-Mogg is a sex god. He's so clever. I just love him. So I don't quite know what Jacob makes of that this Sunday morning. And some more Donald Trump news. Donald Trump not welcome in a London borough after a council have passed a motion opposing the US president's visit. And yeah, the Royal Borough of Greenwich have decided that the bigoted US president should not visit their borough. Quite what they're going to achieve by that, I don't know, but I'm sure they feel really, really good about themselves. OK, I've got Alex Hulse back, LBC's reporter in the Midlands. Alex, good morning.
Yes, hello. This happened, as we know, on a stretch of the road in the Edgbaston area, Lee Bank Middleway. That borders the city centre and leads from one of the city's main night spots, Broad Street, to the east of the city. It would have been very busy with people heading home from nights out. It can get quite congested as well. And it was in an underpass under the Belgrave interchange where emergency services were called at about 1:10 this morning. West Midlands Ambulance Service say a taxi ended up on its side with the driver and his 2 passengers being confirmed as having died. 3 men in another car were killed. They were thrown out of their car. A 4th was taken to hospital. And I've just been speaking with Murray McGregor, who's a spokesperson with the service. He's been telling us a bit more about what the scene was like when his teams arrived.
Very quickly they assessed all of the people in those vehicles. It was immediately obvious that some were extremely seriously ill, and it's a case of prioritising those. To put it into perspective, we've held a debrief with all of our staff involved in it. We took them off the road to make sure that we could talk to them, just to sort of go through what exactly had happened. We've also offered them further support today and ongoing.
Well, we've been told 3 other cars were involved. They were trying to swerve to avoid getting involved. The road's expected to be closed for most of the day, and it could mean some Christmas shoppers coming into the city could be held up. West Midlands Police say they're investigating what's caused the accident, describing it as upsetting and very difficult.
Alex, thank you for updating us on that horrendous situation that's occurred in that underpass in Birmingham overnight. Please drive safely, everybody, over the Christmas holiday. Back to the Labour Party. They stood in that election. They appealed to Leavers and Remainers, but the manifesto was perfectly clear. We're leaving the union. We're leaving the single market. We're taking back control of our borders. It now appears to be very, very different to that. They still say they accept we're leaving the European Union, but Sir Keir Starmer's position on the single market and customs union, well, he basically said last Sunday that he looked at the model that Norway had and he saw that as where we should be. And Norway is a member of the EU's single market. And interestingly, rather like Norway, the Norwegians voted twice in a referendum not to be members of the European club, and despite that, their government took them into the single market without ever asking them their opinion. Is that what Labour sees for us? Despite the fact we don't want it, if we had a Labour government, we'd get it anyway. That's how it begins to feel to me. Tony Blair tries to convince the public to repent of the sin of Brexit, I get on Twitter. Well, yes, I think that's exactly what Tony Blair wants to do. And he's going to go on trying. Of that, I've got no doubt. My next caller is Ben from Clacton in Essex. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning. So, have Labour shifted, Ben?
In my opinion, they haven't. The Labour Party policy is still to leave the market. And the reason they want a decent Brexit.
Hang on a second, Ben. Hang on a second. Let's get our terminology right here. So the Labour position is to leave the union. Yes, I agree with that. It's not to leave the market, though. That's not so clear, is it?
Well, the concern is that Priti Patel, the Conservative senior minister, and David Cameron at the time said they're going to have a bonfire of the regulations. Now, that means that employment legislation will be thrown out, and also maternity leave, all that sort of stuff that was actually gained from Europe to protect ordinary working people. A lot of them voted Brexit, and they'll be affected if... And the vote in Parliament wasn't to do with stopping Brexit. It was to do with stopping the government from having Henry VIII powers.
Yes, I mean...
to come back to Parliament and overrule Parliament sovereignty. And they voted against it because of the fact that you cannot have government ministers willy-nilly going off and making decisions which cannot be reversed in our sovereign Parliament.
Well, I do understand that there is an argument for parliamentary sovereignty. Just it's a bit rich when it's being put by people like Ken Clarke, who spent their entire careers trying to get rid of the sovereignty of our parliament and hand it up to a higher set of institutions. But Ben, that aside, what Keir Starmer said in those interviews last Sunday couldn't have been clearer. He sees a Norway-style model as being the future for our country. And all I'm saying, Ben, and you could argue, you could argue if you want with me that Europe, gives us rights that we'd never have had. I mean, actually, I think we're quite a civilised country and we can manage our own rights for workers and everybody else. But Ben, isn't the point that for Keir Starmer to have said that last weekend is a long way away from the manifesto put before people back in June?
Yes, but I was a senior trade union negotiator, and the council would come along with a load of cuts, and I would either have to work with them on these because they generally have the power to make the best deal we possibly can out of the situation. Now, if we're going to have Brexit, then we must protect working people, and if we don't protect working people, then it's a complete disaster because working people nowadays don't have many rights because of the legislation on tribunals, etc. And that's what I would accept Brexit if the rules on employment and maternity leave and all that sort of decent treatment of working people was allowed to stay.
Ben, as a trade unionist, can you answer me something? What has open-door immigration done for the rights of British workers?
Well, they're blaming the wrong people. They should be blaming successive governments, both Labour and Tory. We've been in the market for 40 years, and they must have known that there was going to be movement of people all around Europe.
Oh, well...
And nobody planned for it.
Well, hang on. Tony Blair told us when 8 and then 10 former communist countries joined that it would lead to another 13,000 people a year. They got it completely wrong, Ben, didn't they?
Well, they did, but they don't. The successive governments, both Labour, Tory and the coalition, never planned. And the reason that working people up north, perfectly justifiably, were blaming governments, not just the Tory government, but Labour governments as well, for not actually building the infrastructure. That's the problem. If they built the infrastructure to handle the people in housing and employment, all that sort of thing, then we wouldn't have had this backlash. And
I have a feeling, Ben, they've been terribly clever. Brussels and the pro-EU side have been terribly clever. They've given you a few pieces of legislation, and in return for that, they've actually parcelled up so many workers in this country into the hands of big businesses and basically cheap labour. Ben, I do not believe that despite all its claims, that the EU has been good for ordinary working people.
Well, it's given them some protection that they didn't have before, and those protections must be protected. And I would accept Brexit if that was the case.
OK, no, fine.
Until they actually do that, then I wouldn't.
No, fine. And can we trust Labour to get this right, Ben?
Well, as I said, in certain situations you have to accept where we are. And where we are is we're leaving Europe. And the policy hasn't changed on that.
No.
We just want to make it as decent treatment of ordinary people as possible.
And if they sign us back into the single market, would that be fair?
Well, you tend to say that Labour and Liberals and all that were...
Keir Starmer said it last Sunday.
No, but the Brexit campaigners, MPs and other spokesperson were talking about Norway and having a Norwegian, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. They said the same thing during the campaign, that we could have a Norway situation and a Switzerland situation. The reason they're in it is because about 70% of their economy is based on dealing with Europe. And so, same with Switzerland, they've got a slightly different arrangement. But we cannot not trade with Europe. And
Ben, we're going to trade with Europe.
It takes 20 years to get back what we've got now.
Ben, there's a great big world out there. Some of us are really excited about it, others are not. I know. I thank you for your call. And Ben making the argument, an argument that is popular in parts of this country, that actually Europe's been great for us with lots and lots and lots of rights. I suspect they've actually cost us a bit more than that with the other hand. But hey, you're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:46. My view is that Labour managed to get a lot of votes in that general election by pretending to support not just leaving the European Union, they're still, they say, supporting that, but leaving the single market and taking back control of our borders, and they're now taking a very, very different position. OK, you could argue in the House of Commons their job was to oppose the government, but when I hear Sir Keir Starmer saying that he wants us to head towards a Norwegian-type model, seems to me that is not just a sellout, it's actually, frankly, a grand deception on millions of Labour voters. And we had John Mills on earlier, who heads up Labour Leave, pointing out that about 40% of the Labour vote at the general election was a Brexit vote, and they have been pretty much ignored. Well, whilst we're debating that, there's some really big events taking place in Central Europe. Overnight, a coalition government has been formed in Austria between the Conservatives, led by the 31-year-old Alexander Kurz, and the Freedom Party. Now, the Freedom Party have taken up some senior government positions. They will be described by everybody as being far right. That a lot of that is to do with their foundation, quite a few retired SS officers, etc., who helped found that party many, many decades ago. But let me tell you what's really interesting. They have been a big force in Austrian politics for a very long time, and they, in 2000, went into coalition government. And I was a young MEP sitting in the European Parliament in Brussels, and the uproar about the Freedom Party being in government was such that diplomatic sanctions were put on Austria, and they even talked about going further with trade sanctions. They never quite happened. Fast forward to 2017, and we're not hearing a murmur of criticism really across, from Mr. Juncker or anybody else. They've promised to be good boys, and they've said they won't campaign for a referendum on leaving the European Union. But hey, the truth is, we know the Freedom Party are very, very strongly Eurosceptic. They're now in coalition government in Austria, and the argument that I keep making is however much the political class and the establishment and the liberal media in this country try to fight back against Brexit, I firmly believe the tide of history is still with those extraordinary events of Brexit and Trump that took place in 2016 and that are still rolling out in Austria, the Czech Republic, and elsewhere across Europe. I still think, right at the heart of all of our big political debates across the West, is, do you believe that the nation state is the essential building block of everything that matters, or do you believe we should transfer up to a higher level? Anyway, that's what's happening in Austria today. Steve is going to comment on what's happening here with the Labour Party today. Good morning, Steve.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for having me on again. I think we need to recognise that Brexit isn't the biggest issue at the moment for the Labour Party. I think for most of people in the country it seems to be, but for the Labour Party, they've got one prime objective, which is to overthrow the Tories, and to do that they will do anything they can to get support, to get voters, and that's the reason they're being deliberately evasive, because they're trying to back two horses.
Yeah, I mean, providing parliamentary opposition, Steve, I mean, I've got less of a problem with the way Labour voted this week than I have about what Keir Starmer's been saying and others have been saying in public. So, I do get the point about providing democratic opposition. But so your basic view is that winning the election is what matters, fine, and that they're prepared, and that they're prepared to be totally flexible with policy according to what suits, yeah?
Well, I think they're trying to be publicly flexible to get votes. They don't want to lose half their voters. And when you think, wasn't it 70% of their constituencies, 70% of their MPs are in constituencies that voted to leave, and I think they understand that. So that's why they're trying to be a bit evasive about it.
OK, so you still think then, so your view is they're still very much on the fence and we shouldn't prejudge which side of this argument they'll come down on?
I'm not sure they are on the fence, but I think they're publicly trying to back both forces. No. I mean, personally, I'm a Democrat. In principle, I agree with the decision made this week. I think Parliament should have a say on the final deal. I think that, however, I do think that's really, really dangerous, because I don't trust the people that would be given power to. That's the issue for me.
No, fair dues, Steve. I understand that they are trying to keep support from both sides of the argument, and I understand that, and I see that, and there are commentators, Steve, out there this morning making the same point you're making. That's the game that Labour will continue to play, but my argument, Steve, is there's been quite a big shift, and I think we're heading towards the position where Labour are going to fight the next election as effectively a Remain party, and by that I don't mean an attempt to rejoin the European Union, because they know that in a referendum the British public would reject that outright, but an attempt to keep us in something that closely resembles it. Steve, I thank you very much indeed for your call. It's not only the Labour Party being Remain, the Conservative Party and the media are all Remain, says Mark. Well, Mark, it's difficult to disagree with that, really, because the truth is, if you see this transition deal that the Prime Minister wants to tie up over the course of the next few months, it would mean that at midnight on the 29th of March 2019, that's if that date holds, nothing would change at all. We would still be paying money, we would still be subject to their laws, we would still have open borders. All that would have happened is we would have left in name only. And I am, well, surprised and perhaps disappointed that the Leavers in the Tory party are not being a lot louder than they are. Yeah, sure, Peter Bone saying things. We've got Jacob Rees-Mogg saying things, Ian Duncan-Smith saying things, but too few of them, in my view, are saying very much, because they don't want to cause problems for the party, because they might let Labour in, and we get back to the same thing that dominates British politics. We have to support this party because we hate the other one a little bit more. Makes it very, very difficult to get genuine change in this country. Nigel Farage wanted a Norway deal before the referendum. Now you change your mind. I get on Twitter, no, I never advocated a Norway deal. What I did say, when Cameron said, wouldn't it be awful if we were like Norway or Switzerland, was they're in a damn sight better place than us. But being in a better place than us doesn't mean that's where I wanted to finish. And if we did finish up like Norway, well, I wonder, Mr. Starmer, if that meant we got back our fisheries, etc., we might be slightly better off as Norway, but it is not what we voted for. Let's be clear. Marion is calling me from Finchley. Good morning, Marion.
Oh, good morning, Nigel. I've been enjoying all the conversations. An earlier caller some time ago, Simon, was pressing you to be specific about the way that the European Union has interfered with our laws and so on. And you weren't really specific enough with him.
Marion, it doesn't interfere with our laws, it makes our laws.
Indeed, it does. And I'm ringing about one specific point.
Yeah.
I read about it in July in connection with the dreadful Grenfell Tower tragedy. The British, the building research establishment, the British one, were concerned about the way that cladding was being applied to buildings, and it wanted the British standard, which is BS 8414, to apply, and MPs had recommended it should replace the wholly inadequate EN 13501. But the latter had come from the European Union, making it mandatory. So under EU law, the new British standard could only therefore be a voluntary and more expensive option. Now, that's just one. I mean, it's terribly
Marion, I have to bow to your knowledge on this. I don't know those numbers. I do know that there were EU standards on building materials and on hazard, but I can't comment on the specifics of that because I don't know the answer. But Marion, you know, whether it's safety or whether it's the environment or whether it's the right of employees, you know, the point about the referendum was we're saying, as a self-governing nation, we're good enough to do this stuff and to get it right for ourselves. And my sense is that Labour, since the general election, have decided that actually they want the EU to do this stuff and not us. Marion, I thank you for your call. We'll have to check those numbers about Grenfell. I mean, I knew something about this, but not all of it. Moving on, the Church of England has apologised to the relatives of a bishop for the way it investigated child abuse claims against him made decades after his death. A report into the handling of the case has criticised the Church's actions, describing its process as deficient. In a few minutes, I'll be speaking to the author of a report into this issue, Lord Carlisle, and we're going to debate this. But my question to you is, do we need new laws to protect the anonymity of those accused of sexual offences? Because I really do think we do. If you agree with me, call me on 0345 6060973. Or if you think, no, we need victims to come forward and therefore putting names out there matters, text to 84850. Maybe you're on the fence on this difficult moral issue, but you can tweet me any view or question using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and watch me on Facebook. We're live from London next.